I want to thank you guys all for having me here today. I'm grateful to be in your city and have a moment here to share a little bit about SRP. And this is a high-level 30,000 foot view of what disaster preparedness is all about. Because in our organization we live by 3 words, and that's prepare, respond, recover. One of the famous words from New York OEM, Office of Emergency Management, Jared Bernstein, was right after 9/11 when he was standing on top of a pile of rubble, and his famous words were, "You don't want to meet someone for the first time while standing around in the rubble." So, that being said, one of the most important things in this process is understanding who you're working with, what organizations are putting your plans together, what do your plans look like, and does your plan coincide and is it compliant to what is being done on a federal, state, and local level. The critical part of it is not just having an accurate disaster plan, it's putting that plan to the test, running drills against it. I can't remember how many times I've been in situations where they hand me a set of paper plans and we're going through with our team and looking at it, and I'm like, are these your disaster plans? Flipping through them and finding all types of errors, gaps, people that are included in the paper plans that no longer work at the organization. Breakdown after breakdown after breakdown of things that do not work. So a plan is only as good as the people that are responding to it and that have actively drilled in it so that there's a natural knowing about how to respond when that incident occurs in that moment. Do not choose people to be part of your internal disaster response team and planning team that they don't have the makeup for it. Under a stressful situation, they may be the ones to panic and go the other direction when an entire team in that organization is counting on that person to actually be able to effectuate and actually deploy the plan. One of the most important things that I find in the disaster planning part of it is I can't tell you how many planners I sit down with who are excellent architects. They could put together the most beautiful plans, and I've talked to some of the country's top disaster planning architects, and his exact words are, "I make plans so people can check the box." That's great. So you got the check the box part handled, but the actual architectural disaster plans don't work in the real world. It's the same thing as an architect that never built a house. So he draws a plan, gives it to the contractor looks at it and says, "This looks good on paper," but it's actually not going to equate what actually happens in the field. So understanding that those plans are simply plans, and then working with people who actually are in the disaster response field to be able to actually make those plans workable. The big difference is I see the plans and I respond to plans all over the world. The biggest thing is that we're the ones responding to the plan. So when someone says, "Here's my plan," I get to find out real fast in those responses to scenarios how good those plans are. Do they actually work or do they not work? So, some of the things that we actually cover in this process is doing a complete business impact analysis, completely going through their business continuity plans, reviewing their entire insurance risk, what their policies, what their coverages are, how that is architected. What are their early warning systems set up? Do they have a predictive severe weather notification process? Is it site specific? Is it giving it to them, say they have 1,500 properties across the country, is it site specific? Does alert go out ahead of time so that SRP can deploy crews and teams, be it roofing contractors, be it mitigation crews, be it shrink wrap companies, into that zone just outside the impact area to make sure that we can move in there within that hour and secure the premises, thereby limiting the exposure? What is your mass notification process? Does it just internally for your organization, or is it part of also notifying the vendors that are pre-approved to respond? What is that tiered communication like? Again, each one of these things we can go very granular. Today, I'm simply to give you the 30,000 foot view. Part of the trainings that we offer is we take each one of these segments and we break them down in modules so that each part of it, if you have it organized, we'll spend less time in it. If it's not organized and that part needs to be developed or strengthened, we'll spend more time in those areas. What do the evacuation plans look like? What are the evacuation routes? Is it a multi-family community? What are the streets when they dump onto those streets, and which way do they access the highways? Is there going to be a jam up on one area that people normally would all evacuate to one feeder route to get on the highway? Is there alternate routes that you can actually map for your organization, for your planning partners, and for people to be able to get out of that area smoother, quicker, and less of an area that could be actually jammed up? What is the incident response going to be like? Who are your disaster response team? Who's internal, and who are you working in tandem with to assist you in that management and control? So that all the communication as to what's being issued as a federal disaster, a state disaster, a local disaster, how does that interface with what you are doing in that specific zone? Immediately after the incident, how is that information being captured? One of the most important things that I cannot tell you over and over, and having handled over 14,000 claims and property losses, one of the biggest factors is when you're at the road, it's what they call the last stop on the road to hell. When you're in that legal courtroom, and it's a jury trial, and they're blowing up pictures as to what was the damage after that event, be it after a storm, be it after a crime scene situation, whatever it may be. The photographs might have been on somebody's phone. Phone's lost, they didn't back it up, it's not in the cloud, they can't access the information, the employee no longer is there. All this information that gets lost in translation, or the documentation, the photos weren't properly taken to really capture the overall scene. One of the most important things that people can do is do a complete forensic document process, both with photo, video, and 3D modeling. So a lot of times when we walk into these storm situations, we'll do a complete drone survey of the entire property prior to the hurricane coming on shore, and the interior, a complete property condition report at a forensic level, knowing what areas are typically going to get impacted, and really capturing the entire standstill, static of here's what the property was like before the event. Then coming in immediately after, before any work or cleanup is done, and capturing a full scale, 3D modeling the exterior and interior, and then be able to take those two frameworks in a specialty software that we have, overlay it, the AI in it then defines every area that's been impacted, things that have changed from one scan to the second scan. It makes it a lot easier so the human eye, that what we would miss, the computer software and the intelligence in it captures it. Makes it a lot easier to identify and quickly capture that information and share that with both the risk manager and also the insurance company, whoever may be looking at that type of intel. That would be very critical for them. Which assists in the next process, which is the insurance recovery. Once you have that documentation, the very next thing is also the documentation as to what is the scope of the loss. What are we looking at as to the overall damage of this property? What is going to be the restoration cost? Who's managing that restoration company? If there's a mitigation company being brought in, I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, oh, I have my restoration company, be it this company, be it that company, all these different brands that are out there. Come to find it, when that storm comes in, those resources are tapped. They've oversold their services, they're not responding to phone calls, and even that local vendor's actually picking up the tools himself and trying to restore his business, can't respond to your own calls, and that's where the breakdown many times happens. SRP has the ability with 2,700 plus vendors in our network throughout the United States to pull in the right resources for the right partners that are not taxed, that are not going through some sort of company transition, acquisition situation, or don't have the proper staff in place or the equipment or manpower to properly effectuate that property loss and restore it in the shortest amount of time possible. The other part of it is simple people come in there and they say, we're going to just go ahead and drive everything out, but there is no clerk of record set up at the very front doing command and control, signing in the employees that are coming in, checking the logbooks, signing off on those logbooks, accounting for all the employees that are there, during what hours, during what times. What equipment is actually being used, the serial numbers, the type of equipment. Do you use air movers, LGRs, desiccants? Well, how is it being done? How is it being dried? Is there a third-party environmental consultant, an industrial, a CIA certified industrial hygienist, that may be critical in part of that process? And I can't tell you times that people say, oh, I've hired this restoration company and they work with that company. And many times what it is the fox watching the hen house. You have to have an impartial third-party industrial hygienist to manage the entire thing from moisture mapping as to what is being removed and what is staying in place, what it deserves to be dried out, and what can be properly, quickly abated, dried, sanitized, and cleared with a lab on site without having to send samples out and waiting a 24-hour period that just slows you down time after time before the sheetrock and all the putback can be put back into place. Controlling that beast is critical in the process and getting it signed off. The contents restoration, the electronics restoration, what is restorable, what is not? What is the valuation being placed on the contents that are destroyed? Separating out that inventory so you have a dedicated place to actually be able to exhibit that damage to the insurance company before it's disposed of. Every single item needs to be accounted for and be addressed in the insurance before it is just simply exposed or disposed and thrown out. The other aspect of it is most clients, when they're looking at the situation, when the disaster happens, is how fast can I get up and running? The longer you're down, the higher chances go up real fast as to you not being able to reopen that business and actually your business failing. It's not just your business, it's the customers that count on you delivering your product. You may have contracts in place with other suppliers that actually hold you to a certain time limit that if you don't deliver certain products by a certain deadline, they can cancel the contract with you. So you can see a company going out of business very fast, and even though they may have business interruption insurance, the customers may not come back to that client. They may find a new client to go with that they're comfortable with, and that's how they will continue to run their business. And in a short time, before you know it, you're out of business and you're not coming back. And your employees are working somewhere else where they've been trained, no longer working for you. Not to mention the aspect of the communication. Who in your organization is going to communicate to the public, your public information officer, getting that information as to where the situation of your company is. You may have relocated to another facility, and your customers get to know many times through media. So control and flow of information is absolutely critical in these type of situations. Ask how you're getting your messaging out. And how you're putting your messaging out on your website, on a portal for your employees, however that may look. It is important that you have clear, concise messaging as to not divert or steer both your customers and your employees to go elsewhere. These are the type of things that are important in keeping a business in business. One of the things we talk about quite a bit is severe weather asset monitoring, being able to provide site-specific location as to when an event is happening. One of the important things that clients sometimes don't understand is, great, something happens there. They may not have access to the property. But for SRP, we are very good about getting in early. As the event happens, we're able to actually deploy our drones and allow our clients to log in to a dedicated feed that actually they can see the pilot flying in real time over their asset. They're able to see from, say they're living in New York, but their asset could be in Colorado. And that information where they can log in, view the video in a live stream as it's happening, as to the property condition, that allows them to work collaborative with us as to what resources are needed to start mitigating and stabilizing whatever that situation or that damage that property may be. One of the main things that many times people forget is get these agreements in place with your vendors ahead of time. Being part of the rapid response program is going to give you priority service. I can't tell you how many times we're in a disaster zone and we're servicing many commercial, multifamily, medical, critical care facilities, ports, courthouses, shopping centers, and multifamily list goes on. And the neighboring property says, hey, look, we really need your help. We love the way that your teams are moving. We'd love to help you. And the problem at that point is we may not have those resources in place for them at that time. We may have committed to other relationships at that time to make sure that we are spot on for our clients, giving them that priority service. And that's why I always encourage people, sit down, let's go through the plans, let's find out where the gaps are in your plan, And let's get a priority service agreement so that you are part of our rapid response program, that when that moment calls, we actually are able to activate and deploy to those areas immediately. Critical areas of the area is obviously area location tags, geotags, so that the clients and the vendors know exactly here's the location, here's the 3D scan of the building, here's where you're going to set up your equipment, here's how you're going to access the location. Them having that intel immediately after a storm gives them great information as to how much equipment they're going to need, where they're going to set up their base camp of operation, where they're going to house their people, and how they're going to move in and around that asset. At the same time, it allows us to get a list of who those people are that are going to be deploying, that are coming in for the different vendors, actually pre-screen them, get pre-badging in place so as to who's coming in, and that way you know that these people have been properly vetted. It makes it for a safe environment, and then you know who is working in and around your building. Creating the video monitoring for while this restoration work is going on, it keeps everybody accountable. And I can't tell you how important it is. It also makes people a lot more efficient when they know that the cameras are running and that whole operation is under video monitoring. Creates for a lot less problems, put it that way. Our initial scans also include thermal imaging, so we're able to get a complete scan of the building before and the moisture mapping of the condition, property condition before the storm, and then immediately after, so you can actually see where the water penetrations are in. And many of the times those areas are not identifiable unless you're doing thermal scans on it, and you can actually see immediately after the storm where the moisture has gone in and where the roofs have maybe detached or the walls have pulled apart or other areas that might have been impacted. All the areas that we fly in when these storms happen is we get special waivers through ACOA. We speak to the FAA. We get all the clearances to fly in them. Many of our pilots actually are test pilots for the military in the drone space. So we have access in areas that most people don't. We also fly on custom-built drones by U.S. manufacturers, so we have zero Chinese parts. And when there's a TFR in place, those things typically will ground all drones. We have special permission, and our drones are not restricted by those type of softwares where they can block out third-party, off-the-shelf type drones that are not built for these type of situations. It is incredibly important that once you walk into these areas, you know exactly how the site surveys are put together, what is the information, what is the debris field, was there a tornado that might have touched down in that area, and how did it affect the area. So it's not just with the drones. Many times we get a much higher view aside from the drones and a larger survey of the swath by actually using our helicopters and tagging all the properties as we're going down a coastline or following a debris field from an actual tornado. So moving forward, one of the most important things that when we work through this process is obviously the priority service, but then setting up a central access command post. Setting up the command post, securing the perimeter via fence security all the way around, setting up the monitoring, and actually setting up a guard on site to be able to check people in and out. Controlling the access of a property is important, setting up the command post for security reasons and being able to see who's coming in and who has permission to access the property in and out. Because immediately after a storm, I can't tell you how many times I see looting going on, people going into stores, and I'm thinking to myself, why have they not secured the premises? Why have they not shut the gas off? Why is the power still on? Why haven't the stuff been cleared? Where's the structural engineer? Where's the clearance on this stuff as far as deeming the building safe so it can be safe to occupy? These type of things are immediately following a storm. In the fire department, once the winds hit 45 miles an hour or greater, the entire fire department shuts down. We're still moving into the area safely for asset owners, making sure that everything's being secured and riding out the entire storm during that process. We're hunkered down with the general manager, many times the facility engineer, sometimes life and safety, audio and visual on the property, to make sure that if there's anybody who's staying back, there is a medic, someone from our team assisting in the process to make sure that they can weather that storm and that resources are in position as needed to make sure that building stays powered up, there's climate control, and we're mitigating the damage immediately, not waiting until 3-4 days where this stuff starts to grow fungus and mold and becomes a sick building, and then you have to evacuate it, and the restoration process goes from 3 days to 6 months and sometimes a year and a half as a result of litigation or and exclusions in the policies that don't cover it. The biggest breakdown in these areas I find is a communication portal. People walk in there, they think, oh, I'm going to use my cell phone. Cell phones are down, towers are down, you have your radar controls, your radios are really shortwave type stuff. We find that going to those areas, we're on our sat phones with our vendors, and we're leaving sat phones for our clients. The clients sometimes say, we have one sat phone, and I'm like, that's great, who are you going to talk to? Who are you going to talk to? Who's going to call you? Only people you're communicating with is people that are in that zone. You are operating as an individual, like small little country that's completely blocked off from everybody else in that zone. Bringing the right resource partners into the area, everybody on a communication channel that's worked out ahead of time is critical. You want to send out a mass notification, you may send out the mass notification, but no one's cell service is working. The other part of it that's important during this entire process is working with partners who are trained in the immediate response. 24/7, 365, you have their numbers, you have their back office, you have their project managers, you have their wife's phone number, you have their mistress's phone number, you have the bar that they hang out at. I don't care. You get their numbers, you have a thing, and you run the drill, and you see what their response time is like. You call them to the map, things are not working. You look at having 2, 3, typically 3 vendors deep. That's not just mitigation, that's your mechanicals, that's your HVAC, that's your plumbing, that's your electrical, that is everything they do from roofing top down, making sure that you have all your vendors in place, and minimum 3 deep. Knowing where you're going to have power and staging, what is your temporary power going to look like, what's your fuel coming in, and where are they staging their equipment. Real-time management, where are your daily meetings going to be at? Where are they going to be held, what time, and making sure that everybody is accountable to be grounding at the time that you set forth on your actual plans and information. Also, when you're sending out your mass notification to your vendor, they have a certain amount of time to respond in that notification circle. They are there to confirm that they're deploying, they're going to be on ground, and they get to be accountable for showing up as promised. Again, these contracts have to be in place that as soon as they violate it, you can't cancel that contract and pull the trigger and pull somebody else in before you go too deep into the problem and you have a bigger problem. Things to keep in mind. So, forensic site documentation, we covered that. Roof and building shrink wrap is another quick way to dry to stop the bleed in a critical situation. Stop the moisture, start drying. Immediate moisture mapping of what is the extent of damage, what areas are going to be ripped out, which is not. Humidity and climate control, what does that get to look like? Is to control the climate and keep that building from becoming sick and mold and contaminant infested, avoiding any type of cross-contamination, making sure that the containments are properly set up, your neg airs are properly set up, and that your industrial hygienist, a CIH, is on staff monitoring the entire process. Knowing what the emergency service insurance billing is going to look like. Getting the upfront pricing in this entire process. What is the pricing schedule? Is it being dried out per square foot? How is this being handled? The emergency service pricing, that is typically where I see the biggest problem. Because most contractors in the area will follow a standardized insurance pricing program based on Xactimate. Some of the insurance companies will say, we want a monthly rate versus a weekly rate. But you may only be there for a few weeks. Get clear with your client as to what the upfront pricing is. And as a client, get clear with your vendor what their pricing is like. Work with 3, 4 of them, get them all to agree to a certain standardized form of pricing and billing. Get a third party clerk of records to manage how that process is being done, to make sure that it's being properly done and get it signed off. Because once you use a third party expert to verify and to validate what was done properly, then they're putting their license and insurance and everything else in line, that they cleared it, they were there, they verified it, and you have counters monitoring it to also keep everybody accountable and honest. I'm going to step a little bit into the forensic wind modeling, water damage, or what an entire building survey may look like. I talked to you earlier about doing a 3D scan. This gives you a quick kind of overview of what a 3D scan would look like. It gives you the thermal readings, it gives you the moisture readings of what it was like before and immediately after. So there's areas you're going to capture where moisture got into the building that to the naked eye looks dry outside. The thermal scans of a building which have no moisture intrusion going into it, and then immediately after the storm, getting the moisture map from an aerial view versus from boots on top of the roof is going to make a huge difference in how it's being presented to an insurance company, and also why it's being removed. On the interior, you can walk through that hotel or that hospital, and you'll find all these pockets of wet sheetrock and drywall that you have no idea that there's moisture even trapped in those walls. Doing the thermal scan, running your moisture meter up against it, verifying that that actually is saturated, and getting in there, can it be dry? If it can be dry, great. Jumping on it right away and drying it. Before 3 days later, you find out that it's all mold inside those walls. Now you're removing an area, deeming that room not usable, no longer a sterile environment. So we go through all types of forensics methods of how a wind flow study would work, how it would impact the building, what direction did the wind come from, and where are going to be the points of failure or fractures. So knowing how to study that, looking at the building, then coming back behind it, and then checking those specific areas, those hot spots, typically is where you're going to find the damage being exhibited if there was failure. Understanding how the internal pressures work with the external pressures in both a hurricane, a tornado, and those type of areas, what components of the building are going to be most likely affected. Looking at the HVAC, the pressure bleeds, the soffits, and of course one of the most important things is the glazing. So this is a study that was done showing a recreation against a curtain wall, recreating a hurricane with the same type of wind speed and water coming in, and then actually showing where the seals had actually failed and moisture had started to creep in. Once you pulled the pressure off, it went back towards the seals again, but the seals were actually delaminated and broken, which then deemed it having to be replaced. On this next slide, you're going to see a video, and this actually shows a high-rise building that's being captured on camera, and you can see actually the movement of the high-rise building in the high winds. So knowing where to look, where the stretch fractures are, where the curtain walls may have been impacted, gives you a good idea as to where the fail points are, where how to go about looking at that building, and where to look for the moisture mapping that might have impacted that building. Complete flow studies, no wind flow study, complete wind flow studies, 3D modeling showing what the building, where it stands, what it looks like, where the most high visible points and the pressures are, gives you a better evaluation to put the cost analysis to when a window should break, where the water's coming in, where the moisture's coming in, and then mapping it throughout the building. Specific to tornadoes, one of the things when it comes to tornado surveys and what's made us really effective in this specific area is as these storms start to develop, especially during tornado seasons, we work with the top meteorologists in the country. We stage ahead of time, we watch approximately where this tornado is going to be setting up, and we deploy a convoy to the area made of the chief meteorologists, structural engineers, electrical, technical rescue experts, medics, an entire team dedicated to responding in those responding to those tornadic events. Where when these tornadoes touch down, we're literally there on site watching the tornadoes come out of the sky, staying ahead of it, using our extreme drone team to actually get up with their drones into the sky and be able to capture both the imagery of the tornado, using our meteorologists to direction it's heading, and then getting the actual drones out in front of these areas as our, like what we call God's eye in the sky, to be able to then warn our first responders in the area and use our first responders in the area to clear the path so that there is less loss of life. And we also have medics on site that, should the need arise, our people are there on the ground who have the training to assist in the rescue and the recovery as needed. our goal and our focus is to work with our asset owners that are in the area. And this happens all the time where we're on scene and the tornadoes are coming down, it touches down, happens to be a shopping center for one of our clients. The client isn't in the area. There's tenants, there's a lot of liability. The ACs, the roofs have been blown off, the walls have been cantilevered out. There's a potential for a collapse on that situation, and you have people that are walking in and out of the facility with the gas lines ruptured. You have electrical live wires that are down, high tension wires that are blown over that are sitting down in these water areas, and no one knows how to properly access the building and or secure the building. Our team that are trained in this specific area of how to assess a building, assess the damage, safely terminate the gas, electric, and shore up the building in whatever area, but also tape it off, secure the premises to ensure that nobody is accessing the property, and thereby avoiding further loss of life, avoiding further loss of life, and or injury that may happen to the tenants because of the asset owner not having properly emergency response procedures in place and or people there to prevent any further damage. So you just can't be ignorant to it and be complacent about it. The last thing you want to do is show up on the news as somebody who didn't show up and somebody died on your property and or your business, and thereby both reputation, liability, and all kinds of other fallouts that come from that type of situation. So this was a study done on a concrete reinforced building. It was done on a slide track, and it was to mimic both whether it be an earthquake or it be a wind event, and in the process shows just how concrete fractures and how it can, what other fail points are there in those type of situations. This next video shows actually that same exact area, and you can see as the video goes, you can see how the concrete starts to pull apart and how it starts to fracture, and where now what was once a solid, the shear value is no longer there, the structural strength is no longer there, but yet when you look at it, once the movement is done, the building looks like it's intact, and it's not. It's actually been compromised, it's been weakened, it no longer has a shear value or the strength that it once did. Further pictures, this is from an earthquake, showing the fractures behind the block wall, the concrete wall. Meanwhile, you don't see it. You may see cracks along the top of the drywall, along the bottom of it, and those type of things that many times are hidden and unseen when you're looking at it. So it's not just the drywall. A lot of times they'll be cracking through the slab of the entire foundation, and you'll notice it if you're walking on the carpet or the flooring. There'll be areas that are buckled or lifted up. Unless you pull that area back and inspect it, you won't see it. A lot of times in earthquake situations where the block walls, where the foundation walls are cracked, many times they'll say, well, we can epoxy it. The problem with epoxy is you've got to be able to get a clear epoxy on both sides of it in order to do it. Plus, epoxy hardens in 50, like it has a 20-year span, and concrete has a 50-year span. So you may have a transition point where eventually that, even though the epoxy is very strong, it's not going to hold or bind that together, especially if it was sheared and there was a deflection on it. And again, at the very end, you're going to be looking to a structural engineer to come out, assess it, and then make the recommendations, whether it's safe to occupy or whether it needs to be repaired, restored, reinforced, whatever it may be, and they can make the recommendations as to which way to go. But knowing how to properly document this stuff and what is, are the recurrence of cracks, is there an after, what is the repair going to look like? Was the damage repaired? What are the hidden other areas that might not have been inspected? Did the repairs actually restore the actual shear value to pre-storm levels? Is the building stronger or softer after the storm event? And then an analytical evaluation of what is, and that's all done by a third-party structural engineer that actually has the training. I can't tell you how many times I've been on losses where they'll bring an engineer in who doesn't specialize in that type of construction. But they bring him out as an engineer and he has no knowledge or very limited knowledge that he's done based on research, but has not actually formulated or designed buildings to that type of standard to withstand whether it be an earthquake, whether it be a tornado, and how is this building built. I had a situation on one building where a tornado blew 3/4 of the roof apart, and the carrier stepped in and wanted to pay for 3/4 of it, didn't want to pay for the last quarter of it. But what they weren't paying attention was the actual roof of the purlins, where the saddles were completely sheared off. There was a bond beam at the top, a bond beam in the middle, and the concrete foundation at the bottom. It was unreinforced masonry. It was built in '62. So the walls were grounded. There was no connection from roof to foundation. There was no rebar that went across the entire thing. And the fractures that were through this building, and the saddles and the shear was total, the foundation wasn't to code, that entire building had to be taken down and rebuilt. And they were really arguing over the last quarter of the roof, completely ignoring all the other damage that went from about $300,000, $360,000 more that the asset owner was asking to $1.8 million that was additionally actually owed when it was properly investigated by an engineer that was brought in by us that specialized in that type of building versus the engineer that the insurance company brought in who was not qualified to render an opinion on it. Made a big difference in the outcome for that asset owner. Simulation wind study, again, these are different models that can be done on the structures to see what is the impact, what is the extent of it. The next thing that I want to shine a big light on is the final financial alignment during a claim. Many times asset owners take a look at a loss and they simply see it like, okay, it's the homeowner, the insurance company's got it there, and their shareholders. You got a contractor typically working for the property owner, and then you have an engineer sometimes that the insurance company brings out. You have an adjuster that may be representing the property owner, which could be a public adjuster, and you have the adjuster that works for the carrier. You have the lawyer on one side that works for the property owner. You may have a lawyer that works for the insurance company. Especially when it gets into large losses, what you'll find is that anything that's typically over $500,000, I find the insurance companies typically have a lawyer assigned on that particular claim. The purpose of the slide is to create some awareness as to what these insurance companies are spending on advertising every single year. Nationwide on your side at $359 million. Allstate, you're in good hands. $778 million in advertising. State Farm, like a good neighbor, $926 million in advertising. That's just 2015 alone. The financial alignment during a claim, typically, if the insured, the property owner, was looking to maximize and get everything that he is entitled to, he would have the property owner, a contractor, a public adjuster, and or a lawyer. The insurance companies, for them to minimize it, they're looking at, they're obviously the shareholders who they're trying to maximize the profits. They would use a third-party engineer, their insurance adjuster, and possibly a lawyer in the process. Again, 1% of claims, this is what it's stacked like. As you move through the process, 5% of them, basically on the homeowner side, it's the homeowner, the contractor, and or a public adjuster. That's only 5%. Again, be it residential or commercial, this is typically only 5% are represented this way. 99% of it is the property owner and the contractor going it alone, while the insurance company is working with a third-party engineer, their adjuster, and a lawyer navigating the claim process. 99% of the claims is just the property owner going alone, just basically taking whatever the insurance company gives them, taking the engineer's report at face value, and going from there. Fraud. Let's talk about insurance fraud. Insurance fraud in this arena goes both ways. A lot of insurance fraud is talked about as the contractor, the property owner committing insurance fraud, not properly disclosing what's going on. This pendulum swings both ways. Insurance fraud is insurance fraud is insurance fraud. It doesn't matter. So many times people think that it's only being committed by the property owners, when the fact is that a lot of insurance fraud is being committed by third-party engineering companies. So this right here is simply a slide to show what happened during Superstorm Sandy, where U.S. Forensics was raided by the Attorney General's office for fraudulently doctoring and changing reports, and the slide speaks for itself. And it's Exhibit 6, where they had changed reports and denied claims for thousands of property owners. There's the original, physical evidence observed at the property indicated that the subject building was structural damage. The other one says, the physical evidence observed at the property indicated that the subject property building was not structurally damaged. And that was what was forged. There's the original. And you could read additional areas that were actually doctored and edited and changed by the insurance company and their engineers. Understand something. We are a partner in the disaster recovery process. Our purpose is to prepare our clients. The purpose of that strategic response partners is to prepare our clients when the need arises, work tandem with them to deploy the disaster plan, put our people and resources at ground zero, set up a command post, and work alongside our property owners and risk managers to manage the entire process, the entire restoration recovery process from day one. SRP team of experts assess the entire loss and compile all expert reports. We provide comprehensive cost analysis to our clients. We implement the recovery plan to ensure the business is up and running in the shortest amount of time possible. We bill as a consultant on an hourly basis, and that can be billed directly to the insurance company. The way we look at it is properly prepare, effectively respond, thoroughly recover equals no surprises. Thank you, thank you, thank you.